Hello and welcome. My name is Laramie, and today we're going to talk about some intimidating knitting techniques to a fairly new knitter. These are not the techniques that are more advanced that are intimidating, like cables or Fair Isle knitting. These are going to be your basic, beginner techniques that I still find intimidating. I've been knitting for almost a year now, and every time I have to do these particular things, I get a little bit of anxious, just right here in the chest, maybe a little in the stomach. And so I wanted to share that with you today. If you have a similar experience, this video is for you. If you've never experienced this, I need you to watch this video and give me your tips and tricks, because I have some anxieties around knitting. But let's get right into it. Welcome to my bedroom. The first intimidating knitting skill I want to talk about is weaving in ends. This is something that I have needed to do since I started knitting, but have avoided doing since I started knitting. Now, I do weave in my ends, but I always dread the process. I'm constantly avoiding the process of weaving in my ends. I avoid this particular skill because I feel like I am doing it incorrectly. However, I am not excited by it enough to spend a lot of time researching and trying to figure out how to do it better, which I think that's, it's kind of vulnerable to admit that I have something that I'm intimidated by that I need to get better at, but I am still avoiding doing it and learning more about it because of that intimidation factor. So I'm making this video as a way to encourage myself to be better about researching the things that intimidate me. And so I've had this sweater finished for it might almost be a month, to be honest. I might have had this sweater finished for almost a month now. And I haven't worn it because I've only woven in about half of my ends, and I stopped weaving in my ends because I just felt like I was doing it incorrectly. You could really see it. I tried a couple different different ways to weave it in to see if I could make it less visible, and somehow it became more visible when I was weaving in my ends. So I don't know. I'm just very intimidated by this seemingly very simple skill and very necessary skill. I understand my intimidation of cables, my intimidation of Fair Isle knitting, those more complex concepts, but it's a little embarrassing to admit that I am very intimidated by weaving in my ends. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to record. I'll probably fast forward if I can figure out how to do that in post. The process of me looking up better ways to weave in my ends and then actually seeing if I can finish weaving in the ends of the sweater so that I can wear it and use it. So I'm going to take you on that journey with me. I am going to set my mic down for this. So I don't know, I'll probably do something in post to make that less obnoxious, but here we go. Wish me luck. As I record this, I am reminded that you can, in fact, weave in your ends as you go, which is another skill that I have not learned how to properly do. So right now we're focusing on weaving in your ends at the end of the project. I feel like weaving in your ends during your project or on the fly is a video for another day. I just finished weaving in all the ends of my first sweater, and I have to say Googling definitely helped. Watching some YouTube videos definitely helped, but I'm still intimidated by weaving in my ends, and I will probably remain intimidated by weaving in my ends until I figure out my own process and method for it. but I think it's okay that I'm intimidated by weaving in my ends. And if you're a new knitter like me and you find this an intimidating or frustrating part of the process, I completely understand. When I get to this point and, my sweater is done and blocked and I just need to weave in my ends, but I'm afraid it's going to look ugly or be very visible, I think I need to remind myself that it is a handmade garment, and it is okay that there are things like the end of the woven in end popping out. And it's okay if you can kind of tell that it's woven in, because it is a handmade garment. Like it's handmade. It doesn't need to look store-bought because I made it by hand, right? So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about and do. And I think making myself make a video of this and weave in my ends for said video was a great hack to convince myself to finally do it. Now I can wear this sweater. But now on to the next thing. The next thing I find intimidating about knitting still to this day is picking a pattern. I will find a pattern and then I just want to keep knitting that same exact pattern because it's familiar. I'm comfortable with it. I know exactly what to expect. But when I want to knit something new, I kind of freeze and it takes me a long time to pick a pattern. I basically have two modes as a knitter picking patterns. I have mode number one, which is a spur of the moment, purchase a pattern, cast it on, no forethought, or the opposite, which is so much forethought that I'm overthinking whether or not I want to knit a certain pattern and purchase a certain pattern. And it's not a financial thing. It's not like I don't want to spend $5 or $10 on a sweater pattern. It's that I am just afraid that I'm going to get halfway through that pattern and then decide that I don't like it, or wish that I would have knit, the sock pattern that I knit first. Why change now if the one sock works just fine? But I that's something I want to overcome this year, is become more comfortable with knitting and taking chances on patterns that I am not familiar with from designers that I'm not familiar with. I don't want to just knit the patterns that I'm familiar with, because first of all, I'm not that familiar with very many patterns, so that would be incredibly limiting, but also that would prevent me from finding new designers and new patterns that I may come to love. So I am getting ready to cast on my next sock. So I just finished what I'm calling my January socks, or my first socks of the year. If you watched my 2025 goal video, you know that I am trying to knit one pair of socks every month for a total of 12 socks at the end of the year. I'm giving myself some leeway. I'm casting on my February sock. It is still January. I believe it's January 13th. So we're not even halfway through January. But I don't mind getting ahead, because inevitably there's going to be a month where I just don't knit socks and I don't feel like knitting socks. But as I'm getting ready to cast on this next sock, my February socks, I'm having hesitations, let's say, where I have knit the one sock by Kate Atherley, currently wearing them. I don't know. I love these. I love these socks. I wear them all the time. I have knit them twice now, and I love the pattern. It's a great pattern. But there's a part of me that's you knit this sock twice now with the same exact toe, the same exact heel. It's time to branch out. You wanted to try new toes and new heels and new patterns. Why not do that for your February sock? So I have that mindset going on. And then the other part of me is but you like the Kate Atherley one sock. You know that this pattern works. And you know exactly how the sock is going to turn out if you knit the sock with this pattern. So why would you change? And then I also have this other little voice in the back of my head that is talking about the socks itself, the sock yarn that I'm picking. Well, you don't want to knit this February sock with the sock yarn that you are super excited to knit with, because then what if you find another sock pattern later on that you would rather have knit that sock with? It's almost like a scarcity mindset, as if I can't just knit another pair of socks or get more of that exact same sock yarn. And also, if I can't get more of that sock yarn, is it really that much of a tragedy that I can't knit a second pair of socks in this specific sock yarn? So all of that to say, maybe it's not just like picking a pattern, it's starting a project that I find very intimidating. Once I get into it, I love a new project, but it's like the decision making leading up to getting that project casted on is kind of overwhelming, and not in a necessarily bad way. It's just a lot of these thoughts go through my head if I'm overthinking. There's also the Laramie that decides to order a entire sweater quantity of a yarn. I randomly pick a pattern and then I end up knitting an entire sweater without ever thinking about, like, is this really the gauge that you want to get? Is this really the needles that you should be using? Do you really love this pattern? For the record, the sweater that I just finished knitting, I'm obsessed with, but not a lot of thought went into that. And actually, I will say more thought went into that than went into the other two work in progress sweaters that I still have. Those were very much frivolous cast on. I just wanted something on the needles, so I just casted it on and called it a day. So I don't know, all that to say, very rambly, that starting a project is intimidating, and one of those intimidating pieces is just picking a pattern, and that is currently manifesting in me deciding whether or not I want to knit the same one sock pattern for February, or if I want to find a new sock pattern. And I have a bunch saved. There are so many beautiful sock patterns online. So far I've only knit stockinette stitch. So do I want to knit something with a different kind of texture or a different kind of stitch? I don't know. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do the fast forward post magic, but I'm going to spend some time on Ravelry, just looking through some patterns, and I'm going to make a decision about what I am going to knit for my February sock, what pattern I'm going to knit. And it might be the one sock, it might be something else, and I will let you know. And then I will also be making the decision of what sock yarn I am going to use for that pattern. But I'm going to start with a pattern, and then I'm going to move on to the sock yarn. I made a decision. I am going to knit, and let's see if I can get back, the Sock Exploration Shadow Wrap Heel. And this is by Earth Tone Girl Designs. It looks like she has a No Fear sock knitting class online. She also has a channel on YouTube, and her name is Denise DeSantis. And I was so committed that I actually purchased this pattern just now. So this is what it looks like. I'll have to figure out where the pattern downloaded to. I'm guessing it went to my email. So yeah, still intimidated by the process of just making decisions in general. So now that we've decided on the pattern, I am going to go get all of my sock yarn, and I'm going to pick what sock yarn I am going to use for my February socks. And I'm going to try to convince myself that there is not a scarcity of sock yarn in the world. And so it's okay just to use the sock yarn that you want to use, girlfriend. Just do it. Looking at you, Laramie. Just do it. So I have a bunch of sock yarn in these baskets back here. I think for March, I am going to knit with Peyton's Croy of some kind, this brand. I have several different colors of this. My last pair of socks was knitted with the KNC or Knit and Crochet Sock Star in this colorway, which is Tutti Frutti Pop. It was enjoyable, but I actually think I like knitting with Peyton's Croy a little bit better. I am currently blocking those socks, so I can't tell you about like wearability, which one feels better on my feet, but overall, the knitting process was slightly more enjoyable for me with Peyton's Croy, so that's what we're going to go with. All right, decisions have been made. This is one of the sock colors that I have scarcity mindset around that I'm having a hard time being like, just knit the dang thing. So this are mid-century stripes. I love this. I don't know if it's going to focus at all for me. I love this sock yarn. It's so springy and bright. And I love, honestly, this is like one of my favorite color combinations, the teal, the blue, and then various like peachy oranges together. Love it. So I'm going to knit the Socksploration Shadow Wrap Heel in this sock yarn. And while that process makes me anxious, I'm glad it's over. So thank you for coming on that little journey with me. And then we are going to move on to the next thing that intimidates me about knitting. So the next intimidating knitting concept or skill I want to talk about is casting on. I feel like casting on is one of the most difficult things to grasp as a beginner knitter. Like once I casted on and got a few rounds of knitting done, it became much easier. And then every time I have to cast on, I still struggle, especially if that cast on method is new to me, or if it's a really small, fine yarn like sock yarn. So I am not going to cast on to a project right this moment. The next thing that I want to cast on is my February socks, but I am not ready to cast on my February socks. I need to read through the pattern that I purchased for it. I need to go through and make sure that I have all the materials that I need. There's a few concepts when I just like briefly skimmed through the pattern page that I have not come across, like twin stitches. I don't know what those are. And I think it mentioned something maybe about like triplet stitches, which I'm entirely unfamiliar with. That's not even a term that I've ever heard before. So I'm not, all that to say, I'm not ready to cast on anything right now. But casting on is intimidating to me. And I get a little nervous every time I go to cast on a project because I am afraid that my tension is going to be wrong, that I am using the wrong technique, that I don't have enough stitches, that I've casted on too many stitches, or I'm doing it again incorrectly. And all of that to say that as a new knitter, and maybe even as a more experienced knitter, you may experience this where casting on is kind of difficult, especially if you're using a cast on method that you've never used before, or one that you're just not like super well practiced at. My favorite cast on method as of right now is the long tail cast on. And that's because that's one that I've done over and over and over again. I really like the long tail cast on method. I think it is, at least for me, the most user friendly. And so I'm always excited when a pattern has the long tail cast on method. I have also been known to use the long tail cast on method when it's not called for in a pattern. That has not came back to bite me yet, but I'm sure it will eventually. But I am making a promise to you and to myself that when I cast on my February socks, whatever the cast on method that is listed in the pattern, I am going to use that cast on method. Even if it's a new one, even if I have to learn a new skill, that's not the worst thing. I love learning. I just, struggle with it sometimes when I have a way that I really enjoy doing. And the new way requires me to do some research. And, maybe at this point in the video, you're thinking, gee, Laramie, it seems like you're nervous a lot and that you have a lot of anxiety around knitting. Not really. These are the things that make me anxious about knitting or make me a little bit nervous that, I still find incredibly intimidating, or at least a little bit intimidating. But the most part of knitting, I'm not nervous. I find it incredibly relaxing. Once I cast on, once I've made decisions about the pattern, once I'm going and I'm just following the pattern and I'm figuring things out, that part I love. I love following a pattern. I love figuring out new stitches and new techniques while I'm working through a pattern. It's casting on, all the decisions prior to casting on, casting off, which I'll talk about next, and then weaving in my ends. It's like the bookends are the part that I find intimidating. The middle, I love. And that's why I really love knitting. And I want to get better in this new year at knitting. I do want to get better, but I also want to get better about making those bookends more enjoyable so that the whole process of knitting can be a stress-free, fun process rather than just a slog I have to get through to get to the fun part. Like I have to read the introduction to get to the good stuff in the book. And then I have to read the end just to finish. It's not a good analogy, because I love every part of reading. The beginning, middle, and end. Maybe it's like writing an essay. You got to get through the introduction and you've got to write the conclusion, but the good part is the body. I don't know. Anyways, on to the next technique. Welcome to the final location in my video. This is my living room. We are going to talk about binding off and how I find binding off incredibly intimidating. I have one method of binding off that I find nice. It's my favorite method. It's the method that I use for 99% of my projects. I don't know if that's an actual stat, but it's what I use. And I've used it for pretty much everything that I can possibly use it for. It's a stretchy bind off. I don't know what it's called, but basically you knit 2 at the beginning of your round, and then you move those 2 over to your other needle, and then you knit through those, and then you knit another one, move those 2 over, knit through those, knit another one, move those 2 over, and it makes a nice little stretchy bind off. It's not the cleanest look, but it's literally the only bind off that I know. And I think I find binding off so intimidating because A, I don't want to have to do it again, and B, I've had to do it again because I have bound off using other techniques that I don't know. It's been so long since I've used them, but almost every time I try to use a different technique, I have to redo it. And I don't know if that's just like a lack of skill in terms of like I'm incorrectly doing those other binding off techniques, or if it's because I am using the wrong technique for the wrong project. Like I need a stretchy bind off and I didn't use a stretchy bind off, or vice versa. And I think I find that intimidating because I want the project to be perfect, right? I got all the way to the end, just like with weaving in my ends, and now I have to do this skill. Like at this point, I just want the sweater or the project done, right? Like I got all the way through it. Again, the bookends are my least favorite part. I like the middle of the project, the actual like knitting the project, doing all the things, but the casting on, everything before it, the binding off and everything after it, less of a fan of. I have to say I'm not intimidated by blocking my items. That's like maybe the one thing after that final bookend that I don't find intimidating. But binding off, I feel like I'm constantly doing it wrong. I also get, and this is not a self-made sweater, but I get this like dip, like look where my pinky is, where I bound off and like started the round, and there's always this like little dip there, and I don't know if I'm doing that wrong, but usually I just try to fix it when I'm weaving in my ends. But as you know, if you watched the beginning of this video, which I'm assuming if you made it here you probably did, I don't like weaving in my ends either. I feel like I'm doing that incorrectly. So there's just a lot of intimidation around binding off. I do have one method that I'm like fairly comfortable with, and my goal for the new year in general is just to like, if the pattern calls for a different method, go research that method. I'm telling you, if you need to hear it, and me mostly, that if there's a cast on method or a binding off method that is in the pattern that you don't know how to do, Google it. And that's it. Just Google it. From here, I am going to sign off. Thank you for watching the video. If you are intimidated by what feels like relatively simple knitting techniques, please share those below. If you are not intimidated and have the answers, also please share that with us below, because as a fairly new knitter, I haven't even hit the year mark yet. I could use a little bit of knowledge, and there's something about hearing from people in the knitting community that makes that knowledge so much more fun for me to digest. So please share all of your knowledge, all of your thoughts. If you agree, let me know. If you disagree, let me know. If you like this video, like it. If you're interested in following my slightly chaotic knitting content, please feel free to subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye! I don't know if you can hear Theo barking, but he's letting the people walking way across the street know that this is his territory and you're not allowed to walk on that public property over there.